and welcome to Spotlight. The Hayat Tahrir al-Sham led regime in Syria has committed new massacres against the Alawite minority in Hama and Latakia provinces. This came after clashes broke out between HTS forces and the armed groups opposed to the Syrian regime, which left 72 people dead. From both sides, HTS forces toppled Syria's former government of President Bashar al-Assad in December of last year. The new regime has launched military campaigns to root out what it calls the remnants of the former government, in particular targeting Alawite strongholds in the country's center and west. We'll be discussing the recent alarming developments in Syria on tonight's show with our guests. Human rights activist Mohsen Naqvi is joining us from Houston, Texas. And also we have journalist, activist, and director of Palestine Aid Belfast, Fra Hughes, from Belfast. Well, gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Mr. Naqvi in Houston. Please share with us your perspective on what is unfolding now in Syria under the HTS regime.
Well, this was expected. The way HTS was able to topple Bashar al-Assad's regime and take over Syria, and the way he is now visiting state officials, and his international visits are not limited to just West Asia, but he's going everywhere and being welcomed with open arms. His rule in Syria always seemed unorganic, and it was obvious that it was supported by the Mossad and the CIA. And so there was always this element where other groups within Syria, and Syria is a very complicated country. It has many ethnicities, different religions, different sects that live together. So it was just a matter of time when there would be a retaliation and the advent of an opposition group. And as Reber also said, that it will be the youth of Syria that will decide the fate of Syria. And so we're seeing a small opposition brewing, a small resistance also brewing against HTS in general. So let's see where this goes. I believe this is the beginning of many other retaliations by the opposition forces.
Sure, and Mr. Fra Hughes, how do you view the recent massacres being carried out against minorities, albeit by many accounts these massacres started from the early days of the HTS takeover of the country, and they're just now becoming more public?
Yes, well, the first thing that comes to my mind is that both Al-Qaeda and ISIS had a war cry of Christians to Beirut and Alawites to the grave. And I think that's what we're witnessing. On social media, I've seen some very disturbing videos. I watched one today. I don't even know who's filming this, but a man with a rifle shot a young man in the leg, chased him into the entrance of a house, beckoned him to come back under the threat of being shot again, and then shot him 5 times in front of the camera on the ground. I have seen young men put in what appear to be cattle carts and arrested. So what we have is not only a burgeoning embryonic resistance to the CIA, American, Turkish and Zionist takeover of Syria, but we're also witnessing people defending themselves. If you're going to be shot in the street, if your young men are going to be arrested and told to disappear, whatever it is that sadly are going to befall them, I think people have the right to defend themselves. And watching the things that I've watched over the last week, I have to say, the first thing that enters my mind is Zionism. What we're watching HTS do to the Alawites and other ethnic minorities in Syria is exactly what the Israeli Zionists are doing in Gaza. It's a purge, it's ethnic cleansing, it's the excuse of tracking down the former remnants of the Syrian Arab army, and it appears to be the remnants of the Syrian Arab army who are the backbone of this new military council, which is called on everyone in Syria who believes in justice, who believes in everyone being treated with equality under the Constitution to come forward and fight what is a sectarian, ultra-Islamist version of government, which I think everyone in the right minds would be opposed to.
Mohsen Arvi, how come the current regime in Syria that claims it wants to rebuild the country is not opposing the destruction and occupation of Syria by the Israelis? Shouldn't they primarily be concerned with preserving their country's borders?
Absolutely, and this happened the very day that HTS took over Syria, that all of their military sites, any defense capabilities that they had, the Zionist regime destroyed them. That was the target of the Zionist regime. And when those military posts were targeted by HTS, which were responsible for the anti-defense missiles, we saw that, we know for a fact that those units were specifically placed to counter the Zionist regime's aggression, especially on the Golan as well. And so this is why when different analysts, when they say that it almost seems as if this was something that was orchestrated by the Mossad, by the CIA, and then obviously it is obvious that the history that HTS has with ISIS, with Al-Qaeda, the ideological links that they have, and also then their connections with the CIA, which are now a matter of record, it's not far-fetched to believe that this was a way for the Zionists and for the Americans to neutralize Bashar al-Assad, an ally of Hezbollah, an ally of the Islamic Republic of Iran, to gain geographical and strategic advantages over the axis of resistance. But then we see that history tells us that their analysis, they keep making mistakes on their analysis. And one of the mistakes is the fact that there are still existing units from Bashar's government who have fought alongside the axis of resistance in the past that haven't been neutralized. This takeover was inorganic. They've gone underground. And so we see a sudden rise of these military guerrilla forces, and we'll see them in different parts. Yes, this time we saw this in the region of Tartus, which happens to be a stronghold of the Tiger forces in Syria, but there are many different factions and militancies in Syria that can rise up and which will rise up against HTS. Because let's not forget, this is not the first time that Syria is experiencing a clash with the likes of ISIS. They've done this before. From 2009, sure. 2013, it's happened before. So they know what they're dealing with. It's a matter of time when we see more resistance.
Fra Hughes, an analyst that we spoke to here on Press TV earlier, said that HTS has been tasked with the balkanization of Syria. Do you agree with that assessment?
100%. I was actually going to say that myself. If you think about that plan that they had, I forget the name of it, where it was to take over and dismantle 7 countries in 5 years. You think that they're talking about the war in Ukraine. They want to extend that into the balkanization of the Russian Federation. What they want to do is leave. And I mean, the optimal plan is to cripple what was once the Syrian Arab Republic as a bulwark of the axis of resistance. They talked previously, months ago, people were saying you're going to have a Kurdish enclave, if they want to use them terms. Then you'll have the American Turkish enclave. You'll have an Alawite enclave on the coast. You'll have the Israelis who are now just outside the southern kind of suburbs of Damascus. And then you've got HTS in the middle. So if you want to destroy Syria, then you want to balkanize it, you want to weaken it, you want to leave it filled with sectarian strife. When the Americans and the British went into Iraq, I'd never heard of car bombs outside mosques until that American-led and British-backed illegal occupation of Iraq. And I've always believed that it was the CIA or Mossad or MI6 who started the car bombs to create the tension within the Sunni Shia Islamic faith, with the idea that while the people are fighting each other, they cannot fight the interloper. And if you look at Syria and you look at what's happening, you could very well see it suits the Israelis to sit back and let all those Arabs all murder each other the way they did between the war between Iraq and Iran, being a weakened state, being balkanized and not being a threat to Syria or indeed Western imperialism in the region.
Sure, and the plan you were looking for was the Odet Yinon plan, Mr. Hughes. Let's go back to Mohsen Naqvi in Houston. Why aren't Western countries being more vocal in condemning these massacres in Syria?
Well, it is quite ironic, the silence from the West. One would imagine that there would be, that at the very least, there would be some kind of a performative condemnation of HTS. But we've seen that Europe and the West in general has had a history of hypocrisy and double standards when in their foreign relations. We've seen that while they are proponents of democracy, we see them supporting monarchies in West Asia because it benefits them. And while they are against so-called fascists, as they call Bashar al-Assad a fascist, but they are in support of the likes of Jabrani, who was an ex-leader within ISIS/Al-Qaeda. So the war against terrorism was a facade, and it is now manifesting itself in its entirety. When you see so-called leaders such as Jabrani, such as the HTS in general, who not a few years back were responsible for beheading innocent Syrians and innocent Iraqis. We all, the world, witnessed this. The fact that now, since Syria has been neutralized as a supporter and ally of Hezbollah and the Islamic Republic, and because the leadership of HTS has continuously mentioned that they do not see the Zionists as a threat, Israel as a threat, that they have other priorities in dealing with other enemies. It is obvious that the West remains silent, conventional media remains silent because of the clear support, indirect and implied support that HTS continues to give to the West and the Zionists. So it is not a shock. It is something that is obvious, but it also unmasks the reality of conventional media, of Western-backed media, and these politicians who are puppets, mere puppets at the hands of the Mossad.
Fra Hughes, our guest in Houston, brought up the issue of mainstream media. Why is mainstream media, mainstream Western media, basically not going crazy with these recent events and massacres taking place in Syria? I think if the circumstances were different, we would have seen a totally different approach from the mainstream media.
Well, I think you have to accept that the Western media, mainstream media, is actually an output of government propaganda. So they won't say anything that goes against American, British, French, German foreign policy. The fact that they don't talk about it means it didn't happen. People in Ireland, where I live, people in the UK, people in Europe, if they're not watching the things that we're watching, if they're not hearing the things that we're talking about, then they are not aware of the truth on the ground. I watched the propaganda recently around Giuliani and how he's had this Council of Reconciliation. They're not, fighting the Zionists because they're too busy murdering innocent, unarmed Alawites along the coast. I've been to Latakia, I've been to Tartus, I visited Syria on 5 occasions, and I really have to say it's a sad set of circumstances that not only did the Syrian Arab Republic stand alone for so many years before their friends in Iran and Hezbollah and the Russians came to help save the civilian population against possible pogroms and massacres. But now that these people have got into power, they are puppets of the West. They are bought and paid for. These guys are all mercenaries. I read somewhere, I don't know whether this is completely true, but all the leaders in the governmental structures of HTS have Turkish passports. Half of the people involved in HTS are not even Syrian. These are people who believe in the caliphate, who believe in their perversion of Islam, and they are paid mercenaries. So these people are just thugs, psychopaths, given guns, and without proper law and order and institutions of the state. They can just murder whoever they want. They can, God forbid, rape whoever they want. They can torture whoever they want. So these people are not in place to defend the people of Syria. They're too busy carving out their own sectarian niche, and they'll do whatever the Zionists say, whatever the Americans say, whatever the Saudis say who pay them, and whatever the Turks tell them to do. These people are nothing but bought assets that have been given arms, training, finances, and political cover to basically go on a rampage across Iraq and then into Syria. And where are they going to go next? Is Lebanon safe? We've already seen a murderous campaign on the border between Syria and Lebanon. And as our friend has already alluded to, the HTS have said the Zionists are not their enemy, and either are the Americans, for that matter, even if they don't say it publicly. Their enemies are the Shia of Hezbollah and Iran.
Mohsen Naqvi, let's strip this down to the core question here. Who benefits from instability in Syria?
Israel and the US.
Would you like to elaborate on that?
Absolutely. I mean, a weak Hezbollah, a weak axis of resistance empowers the Zionists. The Zionists now, not only do they control the Egyptian side of the border, the Jordanian side of the border, but they also have control over Syria now, which, as we all know, was a stronghold for Hezbollah, for the Islamic Republic of Iran. And yes, the resistance will find and maneuver around these changes and will find new ways, as Sheikh Naim Qasim also mentioned. But a weak Syria, a destabilized Syria, a Syria run by ISIS, is a Syria that supports the agenda of the Zionists. It supports the military empowerment of the US in West Asia. And so it's when we say that Jilani is someone that has been placed by the Mossad, by the CIA, it is based on precedent. Have you not seen this happen before in the past? Have you not seen the monarchy, the monarchies in West Asia that explicitly support the US and the Zionists as well? Not too long ago, before the Al-Aqsa flood operation, we saw that the UAE was going to accept the Zionists. Saudi Arabia was going to accept Israel as a state, which was something that was unheard of in the Muslim community. But then we see now that the destabilizing of Syria and these internal conflicts in Syria, which may also have an effect on Lebanon, right? So these strongholds, the weakening of these strongholds, further empowers the Zionists against the axis of resistance. But I think there is a miscalculation on part of the US empire and the Zionists over here, because what they don't realize is that this is not 2013, 2014, 2017. There wasn't a Yemen a few years back. Now you have a Yemen, an entire country with the military capabilities at their disposal that they've been using, and we've seen that they've used them, that they don't shy away from using those military capabilities on the US empire and the Zionist regime. So the equations have changed. The Islamic Republic of Iran has become much more stronger in its military capability than it was a few years back. And we saw in True Promise 2 and True Promise 1 how the Islamic Republic of Iran was able to penetrate through the so-called defense systems of the Zionist regime. So yes, while Israel and the US do benefit from this loss, yet, as Shaykh Qasim Soleimani used to say, that it is in times of distress and in times of loss when you find the real victories. And so this is one of those times where the opportunities will present themselves to the axis of resistance, and the resilience of the axis of resistance has been proven over the past decades, and we will see those victories come soon. victories such as the Al-Aqsa Flood operation, we will see them come
Okay.
back.
Frau Hughes, all the arrows point in the direction of the U.S. and the Israeli regime. Mr. Naqvi believes that as well. I want you to talk about that same topic for us. It's a known fact that the Israeli regime supported the very militant groups in power now in Syria for years, working behind the scenes to destabilize Bashar Assad's government in Damascus. And of course, let's not forget Operation Timber Sycamore, planned and funded by the Obama administration, devised for the overthrow of the Assad government.
Well, if you get out a map and you sit and you put Israel in the center of the map and you look around them and you see what's happening. I mean, Israel is a white European imperialist colonization of Palestine. We all know that. But they're sitting there looking at a greater Israel. All the people who support the governments in the West who support the Israeli Zionist apartheid regime, they are also white, racist, supremacist, imperialist, former colonial powers like Britain, France, Germany, and now the United States. So what you have is a white European footprint within the Ummah. Now, if you believe that they believe in the greater Israel plan, then you have to defeat Egypt, you have to defeat Jordan, you have to defeat Syria, you have to defeat Lebanon, you have to defeat eventually parts of Iraq and parts of Saudi Arabia. So this is the plan. So if you just sit back, open your eyes, look at what's happening on the ground, you'll see that every second of every minute of every hour of every day, they are planning strategically for the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next 15 years, the next 20 years, taking down country after country after country. They destroyed Libya. They have divided Sudan. They have created a mischief in Somalia. In fact, the Zionists are accused of being behind a lot of the violence that's taking place in Africa at the minute, with arming certain groups in order to destabilize certain governments within certain regions. So this is imperialism in West Asia, and the master plan is to have Israel. So you have America, which wants to be the world's policeman, and I believe they want Israel to be their policeman in the Middle East, partly because they're supporting another white colonial settler kind of enterprise. And another part is because they want to divide. How many Muslims are in the Ummah? How many people are in West Asia? Imagine they all came together and they put their own sanctions upon the Israeli apartheid state. They could bring Israel potentially to its knees by not allowing cross-border transport of fuel
Absolutely.
and steel and aluminium and stuff. So the possibilities are, but Israel exists to create division. Then the West is there in order to foment sectarian strife among the Sunni and the Shia. And then on top of that, they have created these monarchies that we referred to, the King of Jordan. Sisi was put in, as far as I'm concerned, by the CIA. About 4 days after he was involved in the coup, he came out publicly, stood on the steps of the palace and says, why aren't the Americans coming out and saying they support me? And then the American State Department said, we accept that there's a new regime in Egypt. So it's about imperialism and resource death in West Asia.
We were running short of time. Very briefly, if you may, what kind of repercussions could there be for stability in the broader West Asia region if this crisis in Syria takes a turn for the worse?
Well, as for stability, I'm not quite sure of, but one thing is for sure, that whenever there is injustice, there's a reaction to that injustice, and we have seen that manifest itself with the recent opposition fighting against HTS. And we see that there's the possibility of a civil war in Lebanon. We see Syria is unstable. We see that there are movements within other West Asian countries where the masses are absolutely sick and tired of these monarchies ruling over them, and specifically they are absolutely exhausted with the hypocrisy of these monarchies that have shown explicit support to the Zionists. We've seen Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. We've seen the UAE play its role against the Palestinian people. So the stability will come when there is justice throughout the region. Stability will come when the U.S. empire decides to go back to the U.S. When they when they don't have any military bases and the Zionist regime.
Let's end it on that note. Thanks to human rights activist Mohsen Alvi joining us from Houston, Texas. And also thanks to journalist, activist, and director of Palestine Aid Belfast, Fra Hughes, joining us from Belfast. And special thanks to you, our viewers, for staying with us on tonight's edition of Spotlight. It's good night for now, and see you next time.